Hi, I'm Shan, and I'm going to tell you my tale. This is all about my health journey and my journey to live a healthier lifestyle and the reasons as to why. I'm a cancer survivor. I was diagnosed with cancer a little over a year ago, and I've been cancer free for over a year. My last chemo treatment was October 8th of 2021, but it starts a little bit before that because I didn't suspect that I had cancer. In June of 2020, remember, this is like in the height of COVID, my stomach became very swollen and to the point where it actually hurts to breathe. So I ended up having to call out of work and went to the doctor. My doctor did a preliminary test and said, okay, you have a urinary infection, but we need to find out, why is your stomach so swollen? I mean, I literally looked like I was 8 months pregnant. I mean, it was that swollen. So I went to the ER. Nobody could go in with me. So I'm sitting in there scared, thinking, oh my God, what if I have internal bleeding and this is, or a ruptured spleen or something, or my colon had exploded. I don't know. I was in an incredible amount of pain. So I'm in the ER. They run some tests and find out I definitely had a urinary infection. And it was so bad that if I would have waited even one day more, it most likely would have turned into a full-blown kidney infection. So I'm definitely glad the doctor told me to go ahead and go to the ER. But they also gave me a CAT scan to find out why in the world was my stomach so swollen, to make sure that there's nothing internally wrong. Well, with that CAT scan, we found out that I had a fibroid in my uterus. And that's something I was not surprised to hear, as that runs in my family. I've always, when I had, before my hysterectomy, I had always suffered with extremely bad menstrual cycles, cramps, just uncomfortableness, anemia. So when they told me this, I certainly wasn't surprised. They put me on antibiotics for 2 weeks. And then, of course, I went back to work, started feeling better with the antibiotics. Um, about a month later, I started a new job. In September of 2021, I was at work and I went to the restroom, and before I even got back, I could not even pull my pants back up. I could not even zip them. I walked back into my office and my coworker is like, there's something wrong. You look pregnant. You look like you're about to go into labor. There's something wrong. We need to get you to the ER. And I was like, no, I'm not going to go to the ER. I'm fine. I was in a lot of pain. Again, it was just like it was before. It's like I probably have a bladder infection again. So I called my husband. He comes and picks me up and he takes me to the emergency room, to the hospital closer to where we actually lived. In the emergency room, they run a bunch of tests. Another CAT scan is ordered because, again, my stomach is extremely swollen. And she found out that I had an infection in my fallopian tube, which is pretty rare. I've never even heard of that happening, to be honest. And I'm 44 years old. So, yeah, I thought that was unusual. And so she, of course, puts me on more antibiotics and is absolutely adamant that I find a gynecologist in my area, because I was just going to my primary care physician for my normal annual pap and pelvic exam. And then she's like, no, you need to find a gynecologist. I mean, she repeated this like 6 times. It's adamant you find a gynecologist. I was like, okay. So when the nurse was coming in to give me some pain medication because of the swelling, she's like, yeah, you really do want to find a doctor. There's always the possibility of, ovarian cancer or uterine cancer, things like that, which gave me a little bit of a pause. I was like, okay, I wasn't expecting this. So I search around. I ask my doctor, we find me a good gynecologist. Now, at this time, I lost my job, as it was a temporary job. It just didn't have any work for me to do. So now I'm uninsured, no income, and going through these health issues. my doctor was able to help me get in touch with a gynecologist that was able to find me somebody that did indigent care. They found me a doctor about 2 hours from where I live. So I went to that doctor. They were going to do a D&C where they can't just, oh, you know what, let's just give you a hysterectomy. They have to go in an order of, they have to rule some other things out. So I had the D&C scheduled, and that ended up having to be canceled because we needed clearance from a cardiologist, and I did not have the money to go to a cardiologist. They actually finally found me one, but at this point it was a little bit later. So this was all in around October of 2021. In November, I had a menstrual cycle that lasted 2 weeks. So I called the doctor. I was like, okay, this is a little abnormal. I mean, I normally have cycles for 10 days, but this is going over 2 weeks and it's still very heavy. And I was like, this has me very concerned at this point. So I called the doctor that was 2 hours away from me. And they're like, okay, let's get you in next week. So I go in next week, still on my menstrual cycle. It ended up lasting a little over 3 weeks total. And they come in and they ask me, ma'am, are you still trying to have children? Because at this point I was 42. I did not have any children. And I was like, if it hasn't happened yet, it's not going to happen. IVF is extremely expensive. That's just not in the cards for me and my husband. It's not going to happen. If we decided we want to adopt, if that's ever possible. She's like, I'm glad to hear that, because we really do think you need to have a hysterectomy, a full hysterectomy. With the cysts and the fibroids and the heavy cycles, this would be better for your health. And I was like, okay. So I was approved for everything financially. And I was like, they couldn't do the surgery before because I needed a cardiologist. They found me a cardiologist that helped me. I was able to get all of that taken care of with the indigent care. So in January of 2021, I ended up having a full hysterectomy. Nobody was allowed to be with me. And this is a surgery that, normally would take an hour, hour and a half. It took them over 3 hours. We had planned to do a laparoscopic surgery. That's where they take your uterus out via the vaginal canal. When my gynecologist surgeon went in to start the laparoscopic procedure, my uterus did not move. It did not budge. So they had to cut me like cesarean style. So they cut me, and I have the surgery. In the meantime, unbeknownst to me, I found this out much later, they had to also remove my appendix because the appendix was swollen. I had very severe endometriosis that had never been diagnosed. Endometriosis is actually pretty difficult to diagnose because it's the endometrial tissue on the outside of your uterus and not on the inside like it's supposed to be. So he said my bladder was basically glued to my uterus because of all the endometrial tissue and all the scar tissue that had caused. They had to call in a specialist because he did not like the way my appendix looked. And they said, yeah, it's inflamed. Go ahead and remove it, because if you don't remove it now, she's eventually going to end up with appendicitis. So there goes my appendix as well. After the hysterectomy, I ended up spending 2 days in the hospital, which I was only supposed to spend 1 night in the hospital. I ended up having to spend 2 because of having actually been cut open. I go back 2 weeks later, get my staples removed. Everything seems to be doing well. I go back to work. Go back to work a little bit too early. My incision got infected. I ended up having to leave work that day and go back to the doctor 2 hours away to get an IND on my a part of my incision because it got infected. 2 weeks later was my normal follow-up. They wanted to see me back because of the infection. And my normal doctor, he wasn't there. He was actually out on either vacation or he was sick. I think he might have been sick. So here's a different doctor. I hear her on the phone, which I don't think they knew that I could hear them. And they were like, "Where is Miss So-and-so's pathology report? We don't see it here in her file." So that got me thinking. That's not normal, because they were like, "Oh, your pathology, we're still waiting for it." In my 2-week follow-up when I was having my staples removed, they were like, "Oh, we're still waiting on it." Well, now it's 2 months later. They should have had my pathology report, and they didn't. So she calls them. They send it over. They said they'd have it to her within 5 minutes because she still needed to look it over. About 30 to 45 minutes later, she comes in to see me. And she says that they think they saw some precancerous cells and want to refer me to an oncologist. And I'm still getting a little emotional thinking about that, because when you are referred to an oncologist, you immediately start thinking the worst. And like, no, 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 this is just precancerous cells. Sorry about that. My husband decided he was going to yell at the dogs. So they're referring me to an oncologist. And now they said precancerous. They just wanted to do this for precaution. I was like, okay, precautions are good. Precautions are very good. So I'm so glad I listened to my body at this point, because with the bladder infections and the infection in my fallopian tube, I just knew there wasn't something right going on. And I honestly thought the hysterectomy was actually going to fix everything. Boy, was I wrong. It did not fix everything. So they refer me to an oncologist, and another CAT scan is ordered to make sure that everything's gone. She said, I'm sorry, where was I? I get referred to an oncologist, a gynecological oncologist. I go see her, and she orders another CAT scan, and she's looking over all of my information, and she was like, yeah, you have some clear cells. You have some really rare cells. I've never seen them before. I was like, oh, okay. But she's like, I'm pretty sure that everything's fine. And then she did some more blood work. About a week later, I get a telephone call from said oncologist, and she was like, with reviewing more details of your pathology report, we'd like to have this reviewed by a specialist that does pathology, a specialist in pathology of gynecological tissue. I know you don't have insurance, and I know that you're worried about the costs and everything like that, but I would recommend sending this off. I was like, go ahead and do that. We want to be precautionary here. Best decision I ever made in my life. So she does the pathology, sends it off. I go for a follow-up appointment about a month later. She walks in with a medical intern. When she walked in with somebody else, I did not like that. And she's like, this is my intern. He's just here to observe. And she sits me down, and I had my mother there with me this time. They were allowing one visitor to come in with you. And she was like, you know how we sent your pathology off to the specialist in Boston? I was like, yes. And she said, well, it came back that you have cancer. And those 3 words changed my life. She already had a plan of action, which was fantastic. She was telling me that I'm going to need chemotherapy and that I need another surgery. And this time it was to remove my omentum, which is like a fatty apron that's in your abdomen. and that there was another spot that they couldn't figure out. We were going to have a biopsy, but it was a little too small for a biopsy. So she was going to take a look at that and try to remove some lymph nodes as well to make sure nothing has spread to my lymph nodes. That surgery was 2 weeks later. She encouraged me to quit smoking because at this point I actually smoked cigarettes. 3 days later, I quit smoking. So she had my surgery scheduled. It was in June. And I had scheduled for a chemo port to be installed. And I had that in July. So on the way home, I called my boss and I let them know what was going on because I certainly was not going back to work that day. And she understood. And I called my husband and I let him know the diagnosis. And remember, I have a 45-minute drive home from this doctor. All I said to my mom on the way home is everything's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. Everything is going to be okay. It's caught what we hope is pretty early. She just said it was a class 3 cancer, cells that she had absolutely never seen before, 2 different kinds of very rare cells that she had never even seen in her years of gynecological oncology. So I have my surgery. I have my port installed. And then she refers me to a doctor to have chemotherapy, which was closer to home. Well, they kept not receiving the referral, so I'm waiting. At this point, a month goes by, and they still haven't received the documents or anything like that. And I was like, okay, this is a little bit ridiculous. I called them back, and they refer me back to another oncologist in the same building this time, but this is a 45-minute drive there and a 45-minute drive home. So I was trying to get things a little closer to home. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to do that. I live in Georgia. I live in a rural part of Georgia. Part of the rural parts of Georgia is there aren't any close specialty doctors when you need them. So I have the consultation with the new oncologist to start my chemotherapy. And at this point, I'm starting to get really upset because things just keep getting delayed and keep getting delayed and keep getting delayed. I finally got my chemo scheduled. They call me 2 days before the scheduled chemo and had to reschedule it again for the following Friday. I was like, are you sure it's going to happen this time? This is the 3rd time it has been rescheduled. And she's like, yes, ma'am. You're definitely going to be having chemo. Now, at this point, I had decided I was going to go ahead and cut my hair. I had very long hair. It was down to like the top of your bra line. So I had long curly hair, and I decided I was going to donate my hair because of the type of chemo I had to have. My hair was going to fall out. So haircut very short, not quite bald, but a very short buzz cut. Donated my hair to children with hair loss. It's a charity for children that have alopecia or cancer patients or burn victims. And I just felt that that was such a great cause to make wigs for children, especially with how long my hair was. And yes, I did have the type of chemo that my hair fell out, all of it. It's finally growing back, even curlier than it was before the chemo. I had to have 3 chemo treatments total. So I'm quite blessed about that. Some people have much worse. It's much worse, but it was painful and it makes you sick. And I tried to work as much as possible in the interim, making sure I wear my mask because now my immune system is kaput. Still trying to work as much as I can. Usually I only missed maybe 3 to 4 days a week. You know, the day I had the treatment, which was on a Friday, so I made sure it was over the weekend. And then I'd have to take off sometimes Monday and Tuesday, and only once did I have to take off on a Wednesday. So I did the best I could to work through everything. Never needed to have radiation. And when she removed my omentum, that little spot that we weren't sure what it was actually a portion of my ovary that the initial doctor didn't remove. And that's because of the amount of scar tissue and endometrial tissue that he just didn't see it. And she wasn't able to get all of the lymph nodes. She was only able to get one or two because of just how much scar tissue there was. She was worried and didn't want to risk injuring me. So I have told the oncologist that I want to see myself in a textbook, a medical textbook, because I'm so rare and I'm so special. I think I deserve at least a page. That hasn't happened yet, but maybe it will one day. So, quit smoking. I go through chemo, and I'm slowly starting to eat healthier. I found out I was diabetic. So I have all these things happening in my body, all within a 2-year time span. All that to say that I've started a healthy journey. I've started exercising, and I've started eating much healthier, reducing my carbohydrates, doing a little bit of intermittent fasting, and trying to avoid sugar and processed foods as much as I can. And I'm hoping that there might be a few people out there that are willing to watch me on my journey. Through all of this, I've tried to keep a very positive attitude. I knew that I was going to beat this. I did find out that it was stage 1 cancer. So I was very, very blessed. There's so many people out there that have it so much worse than I have ever had it. So I hope that any of you out there in the YouTube world follow me, like, comment, subscribe if you so choose to, and be with me on my healthy journey for a healthy body, a healthy mind, and a healthy spirit. Thank you so much for watching my video. I hope you have a wonderful and a blessed day.